should you be over it by now? People have a lot of expectations about how you're supposed to be living your grief. The truth is, there is no one set, correct way to do this. So let's talk about how to manage expectations. So because we don't really talk about what is normal in grief, in fact, if we talk about it at all, it's usually to say that you need to be done with your grief by 6 weeks or 6 months, and you need to go through a certain set of feelings or stages or all of these things that basically are just bossing you around. People have really clear ideas about what grief is supposed to look like and how long it's supposed to last and what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do. And most of those things don't have anything to do with you and how you are living your grief. Every grief is unique because every relationship is unique. Every relationship is very specific. If I lose my mom and you lose your mom, we're gonna have two very different experiences of grief, and one is not more correct than the other. This idea that there's a right way and a wrong way, that we have expectations that we're supposed to be meeting or we're failing to meet, like, you aren't failing grief if the way that you're grieving doesn't match what people expect of you. That's always the biggest thing to remember, that no matter what anybody else says, you're right. You are correct in whatever your grief is. It doesn't matter what other people think it should look like. One of the things that I will say a lot to somebody, like if somebody's being really pushy or nosy, or, you shouldn't feel that way, or your dad wouldn't want you to be sad, I'm pretty snotty. So I will come back with, when your dad dies, I encourage you to live that for yourself. Sometimes I can say that with less pissiness in my voice, but not usually. I don't like being told what to do, and you don't either. But there's so much advice and opinions and other people's ideas that get pushed on you inside your grief. So thing one for you to know is that your grief belongs to you. You are not doing it wrong. That it doesn't look like somebody else's grief makes perfect sense. They didn't lose the person that you lost. They didn't have that relationship. They're also not you. You have your own personality, your own ways that emotions show up for you. You have your own things that you do under stress, and grief is stress. Everybody's grief is going to look different. That doesn't stop other people from deciding that every grief should be the same. So, thing one, your grief belongs to you. You are not doing it wrong no matter what everybody else says. It's not just other people that can have expectations of you, though. You have been swimming in the sea of good vibes only. Grief shouldn't bug you for more than 15 minutes. All of that stuff. Like, you're living in this too. So you might have expectations on yourself that you're not grieving correctly, or you're not doing it fast enough, or you're not over it by now. It's not always the other people. Sometimes that call is coming from inside the house. So notice that you are putting undue expectations or undue pressure on yourself to feel other than the way that you feel. Just giving yourself that permission to grieve at your own pace, to grieve the way that you're grieving, it's not going to magically fix anything. You're not going to suddenly stop grieving, but you might stop buckling under that pressure. There might be some room for you to breathe and take good care of yourself, and to be curious about the way that you are living your grief. Be curious about the way this grief is showing up for you. Even if you've experienced loss before, this loss is going to be different. Just because you lost your brother 15 years ago and you knew that grief, maybe your best friend died. You've never had to grieve that person before. So don't hold yourself to your own expectations of what you thought this would look like or what it used to be in the past. Let this be the unique experience it is for you. Grief will go at its own pace. Don't hold yourself to a finish line that is completely arbitrary and doesn't exist. Now, let's talk about pacing though for a second, because sometimes when I say things like this, people interpret it as, so what you're saying is I'm going to be a hot mess and feel terrible forever, and it's just what it is, and we sort of collapse into that full doom. Just because grief can be painful doesn't mean there is nothing you can do inside of it to take care of yourself. Just because grief does not have a finish line or a timeline that is required doesn't mean you are just a passive observer or a passive experiencer of your grief. There are definitely things you can do. Pay attention to what you need in your grief. And this comes back to being curious, asking yourself those questions, right? This is how I'm feeling today. What do I need? when I'm feeling like this. Or I know that hanging out in the coffee shop where we used to spend a lot of our work days is really painful for me. Are there ways that I could get my work done in a different environment? That's maybe not the most clear example, but what I'm saying here is you get to find out how you want to live this grief. And every small step counts. Every time you make a choice to ask yourself how you're feeling and what do I need, every time you give yourself that opportunity to be curious about your grief experience for yourself and what you might need as a result of what's up today and what you're feeling today, that is doing grief well. That is pacing your grief, respecting your own timeline, respecting your needs. It's not going to feel good, but it might suck less. Watch out for your expectations from the outside world, from the inside world, and remember that you do have some control, some personal agency around how your grief is treated and tended on a regular basis. It's probably not going to look like what you expect it to be, but it is yours. So we have this really ingrained binary thing that we do just as humans, right? If you take the time to tend to your grief process and your journey, like it's like this soft focus glow thing that allowing your grief to unfold at your own pace and be unique and all of these things. It sounds really Disney, doesn't it? Like the clouds part and the puppies surround you because you've allowed your grief process to Nope. That's not it. So it's that push-pull between I want to allow my grief to unfold, to give myself some grace and some curiosity, and then on the other side it's like, but this sucks and I need to actually make some forward movement, and that sort of battling constantly of those two sides in the same person. That is what grief is, that like peristaltic motion of contract, expand, contract, expand. Some days I'm going to be able to ask myself those questions. Other times I just want to do something with this or not feel this way or feel like I have some kind of power, right? It's chaos. So inside that chaos, whatever that chaos is, where is there an anchor? Where can you find some sense of stability in what can feel like an undifferentiated fog bank of opposing forces? That's an interesting image. What can you do that gives you a sense of rootedness or control or even like eye of the storm sort of thing? I'm always going to come back to tending the nervous system, tending the organism. So that is things like lengthening your exhale. These seem really silly. Stick with me for a second. Lengthening your exhale doesn't seem like it has anything at all to do with either grief or that tension between I want to let this unfold versus there needs to be something concrete to do. Lengthening your exhale is something that lets your brain and your nervous system turn it down a notch. That's all it's doing. It's reducing some of the static in your mind and in your body to let you make a choice that is the best thing available at the time. So don't think of your tools for finding some stability in the chaos or finding a foundation or something to hang your hat on. Don't think of it as I'm going to solve this problem of not wanting my grief to go on forever or beat me up this much, or I need to let it unfold as a process. Like, don't look for things to solve that binary. Look for things that help you feel a little bit more rooted, a little bit more calm. I'm always going to come back to tending that organism, right? Help your body, your nervous system, your mind settle down a little bit. When you can help your body, your mind, and your nervous system chill out a little bit, those warring factions get a little less bonkers. But you know what else you can do? You don't have to choose one. You can bounce around from day to day. Today, I'm going to let my grief unfold at its own pace, but maybe this afternoon, no, we are going to get some things done. You don't have to choose how you live this and have that be a permanent choice forever. You contain multitudes. So let's go back to the point of this whole video was talking about expectations, inner and outer. How are you going to manage them? The thing to do, I think, is to operationalize expectations. That is gobbledygook. So let me tell you what I mean by that. I mean recognizing that expectations are going to happen. They are a fact of life. Other people put expectations on you. You put expectations on yourself. That's just a fact. Recognizing, oh, I'm operating inside an expectation. Oh, I'm doing that thing where I expect that I should be further along than this. It's basically catching yourself, noticing that you are all tangled up in the muck of expectations, whether yours or somebody else's, and then asking yourself if that is a valid expectation. Is this an expectation that I want to cling to or reach for? Maybe yes. I don't know. Maybe it is an expectation that feels reasonable to you at this time. Maybe it's an expectation that feels like trash and you want to discard it for today. Consider it again tomorrow. The way to manage expectations is to recognize that they are, in fact, arbitrary expectations, no matter where they come from. And then give yourself the power to choose, do I want to reject this expectation or find a way to live into it? It's always going to come back to personal agency anyway. Expectations are going to happen. You do not have to follow them if you don't choose to.